Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for being here. And I assure you it's going to be a power-packed panel with two stellar scholars who have devoted many years in trying to understand the Indian labor market. Um, and of course, with a special focus on identities, including gender. I am absolutely delighted to welcome Ashwini Deshpande. Ashwini is professor and head at the Department of Economics in Ashoka University, where she also was the founding director of CEDA, which is the Center for Economic Data and Analysis, also housed in Ashoka University. She is globally renowned and celebrated for her work on the economics of discrimination and affirmative action, with a focus on caste and gender in India. She has published extensively in leading scholarly journals. She is the author of Grammar of Caste, which some of us already know of. The title of the book is Grammar of Caste, Economic Discrimination in Contemporary India. It was published by the Oxford University Press in New Delhi. We have several copies in the library, so if you haven't yet looked at it, please do so. She's a fellow of the International Economic Association. She's also the recipient of several awards, including the Exim Bank Award for Outstanding Dissertation in 1994, the 2007 VKRB Rao Award for Indian Economists Under 45, and the Scotch Award for Gender Economics in 2022. And perhaps some of you already know this. Ashwini is also quite a celebrity on the erstwhile Twitter, now X. Professor Deshpande also happens to be my PhD supervisor at the Delhi School of Economics. Thank you very much for agreeing to be here. I am equally thrilled to welcome Sonalde Desai to our campus today. Sonal is a distinguished university professor emerita, Department of Sociology in University of Maryland, and professor and center director of NCAER-National Data Innovation Center in New Delhi. She's a demographer, and her work deals primarily with social transformation and its impact on the lives of individuals, with a focus on education, employment, gender, and maternal and child health care. Although actually, of course, most of us know her as the person who gave us the most valuable and treasured data free of cost. I, along with many others in the room, have used the data for our PhD research and thereafter. Professor Desai leads the India Human Development Survey, IHDS, of over 40,000 households, one of the few national panel surveys in India, providing a rich and free public resource for studying the transformation of the Indian society in the 21st century between 2004 and 2024. Professor Desai too has published extensively in Indian and international journals, and has also served on the editorial boards of several major journals. She's also a frequent contributor to Indian English language newspapers. She was elected President of Population Association of America for 2022, and is a fellow of American Association for the Advancement of Science. She also serves on several Indian government committees on statistics. Thank you very much, Professor Desai, for going through so much trouble and reschedulings, for being here today. All right, so we are actually now set for the panel, but we are in Sonepat and some of us have to travel for different meetings, and Dean Dipanshu also has to go to Delhi for some work. So what we are going to do is that I'm going to welcome him, Professor Mohan, for briefly introducing ideas, and then we would also want to facilitate our guests, and then we'll move on to the real work.
Right. So very good afternoon, and it's a pleasure and a real honor for closing what would be considered as a pretty eventful semester at Ideas, where we had a whole range of events planned by different research groups and constellations at the office. And what better than perhaps closing it with two of the most, I would say, distinguished minds working in areas of not, I would say, just labor markets, but broadly economics and development economics itself. One of the things I would just at the very outset mention is that the organizing team, from Mrinalini to everyone in the institute, it's been a very eventful, exhaustive semester. I do realize that there was a lot happening, and as we bring things to a close, for those in the audience who were seeing a lot of events that ideas were doing over the semester, it might be quite befitting to talk a little bit about the institute as a whole, and what it is trying to do. So the Institute of Interdisciplinary Studies across social sciences, which is what ideas broadly reflects or means, is trying within the university to create a common breeding space for collaborative thoughts in research across social sciences and colleagues working across schools. So, as some of you would know, Jindal and the university does not have departments segregated across disciplines. So, you have a lot of faculty or economists in the law school, then in perhaps the School of Government and Public Policy, the School of International Affairs. So what happens a lot of times is when you're working across schools, you don't have the time space beyond your teaching and research to engage with scholars who are working on converging research interests. So a vice chancellor, who we would want to sort of at the very outset thank for the opportunity to create an institute like this, which is, I would probably say, is one of its own kind, developing interdisciplinary work in an applied sense, not just in a contested normative thinking space, because the word interdisciplinarity means many different things to different people, and getting in not into the nomenclature and meaning of it. What we wanted to do was bring scholars together and create what we define as research constellations. So if you go on the ideas website, for most of you who would not be aware, you'd find different research constellations created as groups or clusters where scholars come together, create research projects, most of which are collaborative in nature, some of which may be driven by collaboration from within the university, some outside. So what the office is trying to do is facilitate that research space by ascertaining what research vision each constellation has. And every constellation has a lead. So you have a constellation on understanding the Indian economy, which Dr. Mrinalini and Professor Sherman have been anchoring, along with a team of economists working in different areas. But what we principally wanted to envisage was a space where scholars could come together, think about events, dialogical space of organizing activities which cuts across schools, which cuts across centers, and clearly not sort of operate in silos or spaces which we quite often get attracted to, because in our own work we are very much clear about what we want to do, and sometimes it's not easy. Younger scholars who are new to the university, especially PhD scholars, we have a lot of efforts being made now to ensure that PhD students have a good pathway where they can over time join a research constellation, work on projects, and get exposure to working with faculty at a much earlier stage in their doctoral training. Beyond that, with students who are present here, there's a lot more of active engagement from students we're expecting from next year. Ideas will complete year one in February, and we're looking forward to a larger event called Swaroop, which we would be organizing, and most of you would see a lot of things happening then. So beyond that, beyond the research constellations and the efforts, there are two very important pieces, I think, of information that some of you may not be aware. One is that the institute, but unlike most schools which have the permission and provisional space for offering degree programs in the university, we recently got the approval of doing a master's program, an MSc in development practice, a program which would officially start from 2025 August. Would be a non-residential program, but we're chalking out the finer details. And there's a larger curriculum development workshop planned around the 22nd of December. So for that, which we would extend the invite to all fellows within the institute, but also some of the guests who are visiting us and have been actively involved with us as advisors. The program for us is a unique opportunity to think of development subjects more from a practical sense of involving field-based orientation and learning, and entrenching that along with theoretical dissemination of ideas. So that's something which is very central. Beyond that, we have a few initiatives. So we have Dr. Divya Gupta and Dr. Manika here, who are anchoring an initiative called the Grassroots Action Program. It's an initiative to conduct survey design in neighboring areas of Sonipat, but more importantly, work closely with civil society organizations to train them into impact assessment of the programs that they're doing. This is something which I would say is very close to our vision within the office, to introduce a lot more of emphasis on empirical work, but also in training and capacity building of civil society organizations, which we are working very closely with. That makes me to the second initiative, which Dr. Preeti Krishnan, Swapnil are anchoring, which is initiative called Solidarities. Solidarities is a space which we are trying to incubate as a specific training and capacity building center for organizations and development groups, I would say, which are may not in some cases formalized as organizations, but that need support for implementation of programs at the ground level. So we have organizations in urban slum-based networks, in parts of Kapashera, with organizations working on bonded labor issues, Mehnat and others. So we have 6 or 7 partners with which we are trying to develop a lot more of training and capacity building network, only for the purpose of not doing any empirical work with, but enabling them with the tools that we can provide. A lot of them do not have documentation support, research support. So the institution is committed in that sense on community development programs. The third initiative, called Molding Methods, is an initiative which we have created, which is still at a very initial stage. But what we're trying to do is have methodological conversations with senior scholars about their own journey, which in fact, I'm hoping that from this panel, we would be able to learn from the experience of work from Dr. Deshpande and Dr. Desai about their own journey as initial scholars working and oriented themselves as a part of mainstream economics. But as they evolved in the work that they were doing, how their research questions and methods changed. So we've created space around methods and methodological conversations, which would find its round over time. So with that, a little bit of information and introduction about the office. We have a bunch of documents kept outside, which gives you a sense about what the office is doing otherwise. So feel free to read or grab a copy. And thank you, Mrinalini, for the opportunity to, I think, make this a successful event. Thank you.
The title is Claiming Half the Sky, Good Jobs, Norm, Safety, and Measurement. And I thought the way we could do it, we are going to make this more comfortable for you because clearly, I mean, you'll need to see the screen, etc. So I thought the way we could do it is that I'm going to take a few minutes to put together some questions. And then we ask our panelists to come in. You can speak for about 20, 25 minutes. And then the audience can enter the discussion and we can continue there. We should address the elephant in the room, and that basically means, especially for our students, we would want to know that what is preventing women from kind of being in remunerative jobs in India. Specifically good jobs actually is what we are looking for, and what is preventing them and what will bring more women into the market. We have, perhaps both of them will speak a little about this. We have seen a rise in women workers over the last few years, but the kind of jobs they are getting engaged in is not what we think of as quote unquote good jobs. So how do we increase their presence in something which is traditionally known as a good job, which is, say, your regular salaried job? How do we get more women in regular salaried job out of agriculture and getting paid for it? That's the first thing that we would want to know. Next, we'll move to the employer side, and we'll try to understand that from the employer's point of view, is it only just discrimination which is preventing them from kind of employing more women? Or is it indeed a profit maximizing technique where, you know, they think that it is more costly to employ women, so I am a small enterprise and I don't really want to give them, say, for example, maternity benefits, which is why I'm hiring fewer women? And if so, what is the way around it? We would, of course, with Professor Deshpande here, want to hear about norms. She has been speaking and writing extensively about it, but it'll be a great platform for her to share her thoughts. How do norms enter the picture in explaining the female workforce? And do we really see a strengthening of regressive norms, especially in the light of these, you know, increasing concerns on around workplace safety. So because it's more unsafe for my daughter to be somewhere, or for me to hire a woman and have her at 6 p.m. in my office, I'll just save the trouble and I will not hire them at all. And because it so happens that we are speaking, I think 3 months after the RG Kar hospital incident in Calcutta, the victim was a doctor. She had chosen a less chosen STEM career. She was successful in it. And despite managing to face all the hurdles in every step, there comes the workplace safety issue. So if you suggest that the employer should kind of put in more security measures in place, that's again going to add costs to their for them. And is that going to be another reason why they are going to deter from hiring more women? And finally, with Sonal here, we have to talk about the measurement issues. Actually, it will be also nice for our students to know, why is measurement of women's work different from measuring a man's work? And having done that, how do we measure it better? I think that's this is just kind of just a few questions that you can address. We would like you to address, but of course, please feel free to do other stuff as well. I will request both of you to also give a little bit of stylized facts, which I suppose both of you will anyway do, before getting into the more nuanced discussion, so everyone can follow. I will invite whoever wants to go first. I am Professor Desai. Okay, great. Would you want to move around, or is this okay? We can. Okay, great. Is that yours? जी पॉइंटर तो उनको चाहिए होगा मैडम आएंगे हाँ उनका सेकंड स्लाइड आप निकाल हाँ जी ये वाली जी
Thank you. So, thank you, Ashwini, for the opportunity to go first before you wow us with wonderful results. But I actually just wanted to lay out a little bit the facts of what we have been seeing around women's labor force participation in India. One of the big problems that we all face is that it's very difficult to measure women's labor force participation accurately. Okay? So what happens? Okay, quite frequently, both the interviewers and women themselves don't see what they are doing as being work. Okay? So my favorite example is that once we were doing field work in a small town, and we kept passing this little shop where a woman was sitting there and selling, sweets, drinks, toffees, etc. And we would buy water from her, etc. And we'd move on. Turns out that her house actually became one of the our sample households. Okay, so we go there and we ask her, and she says, "Oh, well, I don't work." Okay, and I said, "But we have been seeing you day after in and out. Okay, what happened?" She said, "Well, the shop belongs to my husband. Okay, I just help out." Okay, now the fact is that the husband was actually a teacher working in a nearby town. Okay, he was gone all day. She was running the shop all day, but she didn't see it as her own work, that she saw it as being sort of a family helper. Okay. So what happens is that when we go in to ask people about, who is working and what do they do, etc., often the way we word our questions makes a huge difference in terms of whether people respond to what they are doing or not. Okay. So what has been happening is that there has been actually great advocacy. That is the reason that there has been advocacy around time use data, that let's collect time use data, because we don't ask women to specify themselves as to whether they are working or not. We just ask them what you're doing, and then we can code it and classify it as work or not work. But that is a hugely difficult, labor-intensive activity, which doesn't get done in the normal labor force surveys. Okay, so normal labor force surveys like National Sample Survey, Periodic Labor Force Survey, etc., have a fairly straightforward way of asking the question. They would go in and they would ask people, okay, please tell us for, person number one, what is the primary activity that they do? Okay. And then if they are not currently reported as being in the labor force, they would and are doing some of the more domestic chores, they would say, but is there anything in addition that they did for at least a period of 30 days or things? So it's a sort of that kind of a structure, primary activity, secondary activity, and you put it together. Now, what we saw in India was this very curious phenomenon, which is that over time, between 2004-5 and about 17-18, we saw a decline in female labor force participation rates. Okay? Let me just show you some data on that one. So what we saw was, we saw this steady fall in women's labor force activities between pretty much in 2004-5, which was the peak, and 17-18. Okay. Now, we being social science researchers, whether economists or sociologists or anybody else, we love to take a data and explain it, right? So the explanations that were being given to us were the following. Okay. One was that women incomes in India were rising. When incomes rise, women don't really want to participate in the labor force. They would rather work on focusing on the housework. Okay. The second explanation was that there was a lot of sort of a burden of care work and domestic duties, which was pulling women out of labor force. The third one was that basically there were no jobs for women. Women were being pushed out of the labor force, and hence they were not working. Okay. There was even an explanation which said, well, there was a lot of mechanization taking place, which is pushing women out of the labor force. 2017-18 to 22-23, the labor force participation rate has zoomed up. Okay. And basically what we see now is that today it's close to over 40% labor force participation rate, from being around somewhere in their 20s in 2017-18. Okay. This is a huge, massive increase. And of course, we have to explain it, right? So the next explanation comes is that, well, there was the COVID, there was the demonetization, there was so much poverty that is pushing women into the labor force. Okay. There was also an explanation that men were moving out, and so the women are taking over some of the household work, or the household farming, etc. So we have had, and then there is there are more opportunities for women to participate now, and which is what is pulling them into the labor force. So we have had a number of explanations around the gloom and the boom. Okay. And what I'd like to say is that I actually think that almost all of that is an artifact of the data. This is a very controversial thing to be saying. Nobody else is ever going to believe me, but hopefully I'll show you some data to persuade you. But then to sort of bring us down to, okay, what are the core issues that we should be looking at? So basically, what we see is in sort of a truncated form here, is women's labor force participation rate for women 25 to 59. You focus on 25 because that excludes women who are still in college and so on, and 59 because it's a pre-retirement age. And what we see is that, oh, maybe this is the Claudia Golden U-shaped employment curve, where in agrarian economy, employment was high, industrial economy, women have gotten displaced, and now the service economy in India is booming, which is bringing in women into the labor force. It could work. Okay, I mean, that's a believable story. Okay, until you start disaggregating where women are working. Okay, so if you start look at this, okay, this is where I have divided up women's work in 3 categories. This is all PLFS and NSS data. Divided it up into green, which is the wage work. The orange is the self-employment, but not agriculture. So it's petty business of some kind. Okay. And the blue is the agricultural self-employment as a farmer or as a farm helper within the household farm. Okay. And what you see is that in general, much of the trend that we see is coming from this family farming. Okay. People were sort of not being counted in family farms, and now they're being counted in family farms. And I think what happened was that the data collection enterprise in India changed over time. That the National Sample Surveys, historically, what they did was they actually, their questionnaires are sort of like this big grid-like questions, okay, where you fill out the grids. Okay, so they don't really have a question. Usually in social science, we have very well written out questions that we kind of read out to our respondents. They didn't do that. They had like these grids, and they relied on well-trained interviewers to understand what was to be done to be asked those questions. And they used to keep interviewers who were permanently employed and who were employees of National Sample Survey. Then government, being government, decided that, we have to contract out the work, and they hired a bunch of contract employees. Okay. Now, these contract employees were probably not well trained. Now, this is my surmise. Okay, nobody ever tells me this. Okay, but my guess is that they were not very well trained, because we actually tried to interview some of these people to see exactly how they were posing their questions, and there seemed massive confusion out there. So they basically didn't ask questions in a way that would elicit information on farm work. Okay, they would just go and ask women, "Are you working?" Okay, and she says no, but they wouldn't ask them. So, you have a farm. What do you do on it? Do you have a livestock? How do you handle it, and so on. That used to be all this implicit training. Okay, and so that kind of led to this down, down, down cycle. Suddenly they realize, oh, something's going wrong, and let's sort of train our interviewers a little bit better. And so they improved the counting. Okay. Mm, And this is very interesting because it doesn't affect, essentially, the only explanation for what I'm talking about could be that we are seeing now men move out of labor force and women are moving in, sort of in the domestic farms. Okay. But if you look at the data, you actually don't see a whole lot of change for men. Okay, the left side here, this is the men and those are women. Okay, and what you see is that there is a little bit of a change here and there for men, but it isn't big enough. There are not that many men moving out of farm work for it to be significantly affecting demand for women's labor. Farm technologies haven't changed that much. They haven't become labor intensive. If they change at all, there is more mechanization. Okay, people are not buying new land. Okay, people are still farming whatever land that they had. So the male movement out affecting female movement in doesn't seem very realistic. All it means is that really, I think we are doing a better job of counting. And I must tell you freely that this is basically a highly controversial statement that I'm making. Nobody else is buying it, so it's fine if you don't buy it. Okay. But that's sort of my personal guess, since I have been doing a fair amount of data collection. Okay. What is more important is this, and this is what I think we should be focusing on going forward. Okay, is that we actually don't see a huge improvement in women's wage work. In fact, we see a mild decline. Okay, it's that the green area at the bottom, okay, which is the wage work. And that's really what we want to focus on, right? I mean, we don't really particularly want to be focusing on all our discussion around movement in and out of, or counting in and out of the family farm work. We want to focus on, how much women are participating in wage labor or in entrepreneurship, which is a income, which is generating household income. So what my hope would be that we don't let ourselves be drawn into the conversation around if labor force participation and going up or down, but let's just focus instead on what's happening for women in sort of market-based economy, either as entrepreneurs or as wage laborers. And this is where I think the biggest challenge for India lies, right? There are all the conditions are ripe for women to participate in wage labor. Okay? Fertility is declining, right? So there is the whole burden of care work is actually much lower now than it used to be. At some point in time, I had calculated number of years that women spend with young children and with women spend with children 6 to 15, and both of those are shrinking rapidly. Okay, so the amount of time women have to spend caring for children is going down. Education has zoomed up rapidly. Gender inequality in education has practically disappeared. Okay, so all the conditions for women's labor force participation are right. Okay, And yet we are not seeing an increase in their wage work. And this is sort of the big development challenge that we all need to think about. And I think I'm going to stop here and turn it over to Ashwini because I have a feeling she may be focusing on some of these issues. Thank you.
You asked the question between maybe you can tell me about that. It's fascinating. Actually,
in we'll run an experiment in Delhi metropolitan area. Okay, but this is very relevant to some of the work that you just mentioned about doing around this area on Sonipat. Okay, so we were doing this experimental work where we basically ask people a question first. We start out by saying, what is the primary status? Just the NSS-like questions. What is the secondary status of this person? And then we ask a bunch of other questions, and then we return saying, okay, you're a family farm. Who works on the family farm? Okay, so we write down. Now you have cows. Who takes care of the cows? Okay, and we write it down. So now for the same people, we can calculate the labor force data based on what we call the status data, which the NSS asks, and the activity data, the way we ask. And you actually see about a 5 percentage point difference for the general farm work, and roughly about 8 percentage point increase when we also include taking care of animals. Yeah, so what we do is first we ask the status-based question, then we go and get household other information, what do you own? So we want to keep a space between the questions so that the people forget what you're asking, right? So then we sort of go back and ask them, do you have a farm? Okay, what did you plant last year? How much did you grow? What did you sell it, et cetera, et cetera. And after all the farm questions, we would ask, who worked on the farm? Okay, then we have questions on animals, how many cows and goats and whatever you have. And then we ask who takes care of them. So for wage work, yes, so there is a wage module also where we would ask that, in your household, who participated in wage work, etc. For wage work, there is a probe is a difficult one, right? Here with the farm, it's very easy. You're doing farm and then say who worked in it. With wage work, there is a different type of a probe, but yes, it's a differently collected data. Thanks.
Okay. No, I always use this example when I write about or talk about this issue. So I find it fascinating when you ask who does the work, you get different answers from are you working? And that just, I think it's a very, very clever way of, gauging women's work. So thank you very much, Mrinalini, Dipanshu and others for inviting me. And it's always a pleasure to be on a panel with Sonal. So thanks, happy to be here. Now, actually, I don't have a full-fledged presentation because I thought that I'll just make a few points, but I do have a few slides to illustrate some points, and then some I'll just illustrate without slides. But I have written about it elsewhere, so happy to send links to material that I have written. So, Sonal actually already set the stage about the measurement part, which I won't go into, and also the decline part. Now, what I want to focus on actually is what I've been talking about is, labor force participation rate is a measure which checks whether you're in the labor force, that is, are you working or looking for work, unemployed, and if you're in the working age population. So it's a 0-1 measure. Either you are in the labor force or you're not in the labor force by these simple measures. Even though labor force participation rate is not a labor supply measure, but it is often seen as sort of labor supply gets conflated with labor force participation. So if women are not in the labor force, in other words, if they are not working for pay, or they are not actively looking for work, that is, they are not actively unemployed, i.e. not in the labor force, people always interpret, most of the time interpret as they have withdrawn from the labor force, or they have their labor supply has gone down. Even though the reason why, the ability for people to either be working or even to be actively looking for work is as much a condition, as much a result of the supply willingness to supply labor, as well as the demand conditions. So imagine a worker who is not unable to get a paid job, would ideally like to work, but has tried for at different times and is unable to find any remunerative work. After some time, it's in economics is well known, it's called the discouraged worker effect. After some time, you stop looking for a job. So when the surveyor comes to ask you, you'll say, no, I'm not working and I'm not actively looking for it. So you're not technically unemployed. You're not working. And so you're seen as being out of the labor force. And that is happening because there's not enough demand for the kind of work that you can supply. So labor force participation rate is affected both by labor demand and by labor supply. But unfortunately, the majority mainstream discussion on labor force participation rates conflates labor force participation with labor supply. It's just automatically assumed that if women's labor force participation rate is low, they just don't want to work for sexual violence reasons or whatever other reasons, but they just don't want to work. So one part of it is the measurement story. But I think I have, lately been focusing a lot on the demand side story. So what is the nature of labor demand, not just for women, but also for men? So here is a simple picture, which just plots the increase in the working age population from 1980 to 2018. And I've extended this graph to later years as well. And the blue line is the total employment. Now, obviously, the total employment figures you have to take with a pinch of salt, because the last time we had a census was 2011. So we don't have absolute numbers. However, people have extrapolated or whatever. But my sense is that, I don't know, maybe the gap will be even larger if you actually got accurate numbers. But the fact is that from 2004-05, which is when the decline in female labor force participation rate started to happen, the gap between the increase in the working age population and total jobs available, that started to widen. So here is a problem, that there aren't enough jobs to occupy the working age population in India. I'm not even talking about good jobs. I'm not even going there yet about, well paid with benefits and, all kinds of safety nets and all. Forget about all that. Just literally something that you do and you get paid for it. Just paid employment, remunerative employment. That gap has been increasing from 2004-05. And that's a very important backdrop to keep in mind when we talk about the decline in female labor force participation rate. And it's true, as Sonal has pointed out, that from 17-18, it started to increase. And, I've written about that elsewhere. And this is just the same figure that Sonal showed you as well about the female labor force participation rate. Now, what I want you to focus on here is the blue curve, which is the female labor force participation rate line, which shows a decline from 2004-05, and then it starts showing an uptick from 17-18. Okay. Compare that with the red curve, which is the share of agriculture in total employment. And it's striking how they are moving in parallel. So when the share of agriculture in total employment was declining, so was female labor force participation rate. And there has actually been an increase in the share of agriculture in total employment COVID onwards, which is not which is sort of going a little bit against the structural transformation story. But that's just because agriculture has been the employer of last resort since COVID hit, and even despite after that. So if you have nothing else to do, you can be in agriculture, and there's some it could be disguised unemployment, could be but there's some work you can get on the agricultural sector. So there has to be, and just looking at this graph, and this is work I've done with my former PhD student, Jitendra Singh, we started to think there has to be a connection between the two. It's very striking that the lines are moving together, also because agriculture has been the biggest employer of women. So the largest proportion of, in terms of sectoral proportions, the largest proportion is of women employed is in agriculture. So that's that. Now, here is a graph that is looking at the growth rate of employment in India across sectors So manufacturing, I've just taken large, broad sectors, manufacturing, services, and agriculture and allied activities. And you see that from 2004-5 to 17-18, the rate of growth of agriculture employment was actually negative. So the total number of people that were engaged in agricultural jobs actually fell in absolute terms, right? And then it starts to rise. And that's when you again start to see an increase in female labor force participation rate. Now, this is subject to all the caveats that Sonal already mentioned. So that goes without saying. So I'm not repeating that. But the point is that you start to see an uptick in female labor force participation rate as the share of agriculture in employment, total employment starts to increase. And a lot of it is just basically unpaid family farm kind of work, right? You might have seen an article, I think yesterday or day before in the Indian Express, which attributes the stagnation in rural wages to increase in female labor force participation rates. I find that very puzzling and difficult to believe, because where are these wages that women are earning that have depressed wage rates in rural India? So that's so this is about family work, family farm work. But the point is that agriculture has increased its share in total employment. Okay, this is again total employment numbers, again, to be taken, as I said, with a pinch of salt, particularly after 11-12, because we don't have data. But this is the CLEMS data set of RBI, where they make extrapolations. And so that's just what I've used. And basically, you see that from 4-5, it's a flat top, right? What has happened is agriculture has sort of gone down up to 17-18. Again, it goes up, but this is only up to 15-16. Actually, it's 17-18. That thing is not showing there. So agriculture goes up, services goes down. The share of services has gone up. But in India, while services add a lot of value in terms of GDP, value added, but a lot of our services are technology and capital intensive. So they are not very employment intensive. So the employment elasticity of service sector is low. So services our GDP growth has been service led. That's correct. But that hasn't generated the employment, the kind of employment that you would need to absorb people who have been who are leaving agriculture, right? And manufacturing has more or less been stagnant. Again, manufacturing is of two types. 95% of the firms are these very small, small, medium enterprises, employing 1, 2, 3 people generally. And there is a very small segment of large formal corporate sector, which employs a large number of people. But if you look at the share of female employment in manufacturing, that hasn't changed over the decades. It's very low, and it just continues to be very low, right? So these are some of the macroeconomic realities of our labor market, within which we must try to understand the decline and also now the uptick in female labor force participation rates. And so, and Sonal will appreciate this, there was a time when economists used to be accused of completely ignoring social factors, cultural factors, etc., and rightly so. They would only be focused on economic issues. But now economists have gone completely the other way around, which is as if economic factors don't matter at all. It's all about norms. It's all about culture. So demand and supply of labor, what's that? Why should that affect employment? Right now, obviously, it does affect employment. And that is the context within which you have to see downturns, upturns, stagnation, whatever the phenomena are. Culture does play a role. Norms do play a role, and I will talk about that. But we cannot completely throw the baby out with the bathwater. So hardcore economic realities of the labor market must matter. They have to matter. How can they not? Right? And why do they not matter for women, but matter only for men? Right? So on the one hand, if you say, oh, men and women are, there are no innate genetic differences or biological differences. But when it comes to economic realities, we say, no, they affect men, but they don't affect women. It's all about culture. It can't be, right? It doesn't kind of make sense. So that's the total employment picture. Now, the famous economists talk about the the income effect, right? Or so as you get richer, the income effect says women will withdraw from paid work, and because there's no need for a second earner, and usually the men are seen as the primary earners and women are seen as the secondary earners. But in India, if you look at, I'm not saying there's a one-to-one correlation between income and education. But if you look at education as some kind of a proxy, then it's a U shape with respect to education. In other words, the least educated women and the most educated women have the highest labor force participation rates. It's the middle level educated women that have low participation rates. And this is true of urban India, and this is true of rural India, which again should make us wonder about what kinds of economic factors, what kind of reality about the labor market can produce this outcome, right? If I've done class 8 or class 10 or class 12, what kind of opportunities are there for me in the labor market? I want to work, I have studied, I have some aspirations, but what is the kind of work available? Think about a rural Indian setting. What kind of jobs are available? There's agricultural work, of course, family farm, livestock, all of that. There's Asha Anganwadi, there's NREGA work, school teacher, a few women can get employed as school teachers. Maybe there's a bank, some bank branches. But the possibilities of remunerative employment outside of agriculture and construction are very few and limited. So if there are girls who've studied up to 8, 10, 12 years, class 12, there are no remunerative opportunities, practically speaking. And these are girls who don't necessarily want to do NREGA work. Nothing wrong with NREGA work as a safety net, but they have some education, and they would like to do a work that is remunerative, that they feel is sort of commensurate with the education level that they have. So this is FLFP by education. In the employment unemployment survey, there used to be a question, which is not there in the PLFS any longer, about women who were not considered a part of the labor force because they were not working and they were not unemployed. They were asked, if work was made available near your home, and I'll explain in a minute why near your home is important, would you be willing to work? And they were given 4 choices: regular full-time, regular part-time, occasional full-time, and occasional part-time. And so willingness to work. And you see the U shape here of the actual FLFP, and you see the willingness to work by education level. It's a mirror image. It's an inverted U. So it is not the case that women who are, so the middle educated women, they show the highest willingness to work. And the overwhelming majority of women who are not currently working do actually have a willingness to work. Okay. Sorry. So this is EUS 11-12, because after that, the question was not asked. But I have done, for example, with Naila Kabir, we did a survey in West Bengal in which we asked the same question. And there are, I think IHDS also has this question. So, there are data sets that have asked women about their willingness to work if work was made available near home. And I do some fieldwork, Sonal does it. Honestly speaking, the desire to get some remuneration from some activity is there very much, right? So I think that we need to be mindful of the fact that it's not just about women saying, oh, I really just don't ever want to work. And because I'm so happy being indoors the entire time, right? So that's really not borne out by data, and it's not borne out by ethnographic account as well. So the slides unfortunately stop here because I wasn't expecting to present a full slide deck, but because Mrinalini asked the question about norms, and I also alluded to it, let me just say a few things about that. So if you look at, there was a remarkable paper, and I'm not using remarkable in a very positive sense, a remarkable paper which was published in one of the World Bank journals that has, quote unquote, shown that in the last 25 years in South Asia, not just India, all gender norms have either stagnated or worsened. There has been no improvement in any gender norm in South Asia over the last 25 years. Okay, let's forget about India for a time being. Bangladesh, which has been much commented upon, including by the World Bank, about its remarkable and rapid transformation, both in terms of labor force participation rate, adoption of contraception, female education, mobility, all kinds of indicators, So it's pretty remarkable that, you could actually argue that. And I just saw the data that they used for India, which was NFHS 5 rounds. And I literally just took the 5 rounds and I tried to generate charts around the norms that they had talked about. So they had taken, I think, 12 or 13 norms: fertility rate, education levels, et cetera, spousal age gap, education gap, and so on and so forth. In every single norm, there's been an improvement. They've improved rather than worsened in India over the 5 rounds of NFHS. And I have a piece on that, happy to share the links of that. So anyway, so that's about norms. As Sonal says, fertility rates have gone down. Maternal mortality rates have gone down due to stunning investments in public health in India. We must also acknowledge things that have, where India has been doing well. For its level of income, India's investments in public health and outcomes, more importantly, in terms of decline in mortality, has been pretty spectacular. And maternal mortality rates, high MMRs, are one of the reasons why women can't really think of entering the labor force, because it's just, physically difficult for them. India has managed that. Fertility rate decline is now below replacement in many parts of India, at replacement in some parts. Wide convergence across groups. So this myth that some groups continue to have this wildly high fertility rates, etc., no evidence of that. So overall, norms have improved. What are the norms that have not improved at all? And that is the norm that women are predominantly responsible for domestic chores. And if there was the 2019 time use survey data was national. In 1998, the NSS had done a 6-state survey. So you have some numbers from the 6 states there, and then you have the numbers for the country there. The male to male ratio of time spent on domestic chores, and here I'm talking cooking, cleaning, washing clothes, sweeping, house maintenance, childcare, all of this stuff. It's women spend 10 times as much time that men do on all of these, across states, across demographic groups, across education levels, everything. I mean, obviously it's not 10 exactly for different cuts, but 10 is the average. And a ratio of 10 is amongst the highest in the world. And so this is one norm that really has not changed. And this is why when women want to work, they want work to be available near their homes, because they cannot be commuting, because as long as this doesn't change, right? Plus transportation. I think Sonal has an excellent paper which shows that wherever transportation barriers are eased, women do join work. Now we come to a chicken and egg problem. So how is it going to solve itself, right? Women can't go out because they have to do the domestic work. And how is the domestic norms around domestic work are going to change? Now here, obviously it is difficult. And these are sticky things. They don't change overnight. But there are some pointers from history and from other countries. So when you look at the history of the United States or Europe or several other countries, even China for that matter, what really changed was when women actually joined the labor force. That was what led to a kind of a sort of an effect. So it had a feedback loop, a positive feedback loop, where once women got pushed out and joined the labor force for a variety of reasons, may have been the World War, may have been something else. But as women started going out in large numbers, that led to a feedback loop inside the home. And that started to change norms gradually. Even today, the male-female gap in domestic chores and care work, even in the most advanced countries, remains, it's gone down, but it remains substantial, right? So I think when we talk about norms, that's the norm we need to talk about. And since Mrinalini asked about the RG car incident, I do want to talk about safety of women and sexual violence. So there, I'll just say 2 things and then I'll stop, which is that for obvious reasons, we focus a lot on street safety or violence against women by strangers. And of course that happens. We've had, gruesome cases where women have been attacked by strangers, by people that were not known to them. And clearly that is a problem. Clearly that needs to be solved. But first of all, as long as there aren't enough women outdoors, as long as the public spaces, the streets, the, buses and trains, etc., as long as they are male dominated, as long as there are only men in it, If the one woman who goes out and is in a public space, she's going to attract attention. So the solution is not policing. The solution is having more women in the street. Wherever there are more women in the street, that's a guarantee for lower crimes against women. That's as far as street violence is concerned. But do we know that if you look at violence against women in its entirety, the largest proportion of violence against women is perpetrated by those who are known to them. This might happen literally inside the house. It might happen outside the house, but by somebody known to them. So, and this is the elephant in the room that we don't actually talk about. So keeping women indoors is not keeping them safe. Not at all. It's a big myth that I think we need to stop thinking about. Ask the women. Do they feel safe and happy just being indoors? Honestly, next time you do a survey, ask them this. And this is a very difficult question to answer because they will not be able to answer because they're typically people hanging around them. So they're not going to be able to so. And separately, when we are not thinking about female labor force participation rate, we do think about domestic violence. So there is a lot of research on domestic violence, but we have siloed them into two compartments, right? So the notion that women are safe when they are indoors with family members and they're unsafe when they're outside with strangers, that I think that it's a very simplistic view and that needs to be broken. Finally, street violence and sexual violence against women, harassment at the workplace, safety of women, employer discrimination. These are all workplace related issues. And they are super, super, super important. But economics has a word for it. It's called employer discrimination. For years, there's been research on employer discrimination, whether it's maternity benefits, whether it's washrooms at the workplace, whether it is wage parity, whether it is glass ceiling, promotions. Then now there's a lot of research about within meetings, how men and women interact, etc., etc. These are all very critical aspects of a workplace relationship. But this is about either, misogyny, patriarchy, or whatever at the workplace, or good old-fashioned employer discrimination. When I say good, I don't mean it's a good thing to happen, but all I mean is that it's employer discrimination. When we study employer discrimination in the context of the United States, we don't call it social norms. We call it what it is, which is employer discrimination. Today, there is a huge constituency in the United States that opposes abortion. Would it be accurate to say that's the social norm in the United States? Obviously not. That might be the view of a certain group of people, but I would not call it the social norm there at all, right? In the UK, the domestic violence figures are 1 in 3 women report domestic violence. Would you call that the social norm in the United Kingdom? I don't think so, right? So the point is that all of these issues are super important and they affect women's lives very negatively. However, when we think of labor force participation rate, we have to be a little more careful about how it actually affects labor force participation rate, right? And whether the solution, which is let women not work, let them just sit at home, is that then taking care of many of these safety or other concerns because that's actually going to worsen the one norm that I think is already very bad, which is women, focusing on domestic work. If women are going to sit at home, the logical conclusion is, okay, then you do all the housework. Why should I help you with the housework if I also have to go out and earn the living and then come back and help you with the housework? So it's going to make that norm worse. And of course, the thing that I didn't talk about, and good jobs, benefits, security, all of those issues, workplace, culture, and all of those are very, very important, both for men and women, but I guess especially for women because of these extra issues that we've talked about. So let me stop here. Yeah. Oh.
My students are sitting here and they were both sides. There were people
So the Indian Express has this both sides kind of a thing. And so this is about the Indigo seats, which the pink seat scheme that Indigo decided because of boorish behavior by men or whatever harassment. So first of all, in that piece that I'd written for the Express, and Mrinalini can share that with you, first we needed a little bit of context, which is that if you look at the total number of passengers that fly in an airplane and compare that to the number of complaints that we get, it's so that's a small. So overall, instances of sexual harassment can happen on an airplane, just like they can happen anywhere else, but they are not the norm. A norm I'm using now in a different way. The second thing is, if men are boorish, many men are, not all men are, and if they are, what is it called, spreaders, like, the man spreaders, you spread your legs in a way that, the woman who's sitting next to you doesn't have enough space, or you grab the, what is it called? The side rest. All of those things, those are, those can ruin or make slightly unpleasant a journey, of a female flyer. But what is the solution to that? The solution to that is not isolating the women, right? And when I used to be in college, the only mode of transportation was a bus. So I used to go to college in a bus and come back in a bus. So there are these lady seats in DTC buses. Now, if you were sitting on a lady seat, first it was hard to get a lady seat, but if you got one, that's fine. But if you were not sitting on a lady seat and you complained about some man behaving in exactly all of these ways, they would say, well, first of all, if you have such a problem with our behavior, don't come and don't travel. Secondly, there are lady seats for you, which used to be 4 lady seats in the entire bus. So their point used to be कि वहां क्यों नहीं बैठी? अगर इतनी तकलीफ हो रही है हमारे behavior से, तो उधर क्यों नहीं बैठी? या क्यों आ रही हो बस में तुम? Right? So then it becomes what ends up doing, it ends up ghettoizing the women, saying that you cannot, now we have done this thing for you. If you can avail of that benefit, that's good. But otherwise, we are just going to continue to behave the way we are. And if you have a problem with it, you deal with it. Either get your women's seat, pink seat, or don't travel. And, it'll be like we as a society or as an airline, we have done this, given you this big concession. So women have a right to an airplane ride, which is free of harassment, which is free of, which is comfortable, just as much as men have. All passengers have that right. But the solution to that is to institutionalize good ethics and norms about what constitutes good behavior in an airplane. Not to say, okay, that's the little corner in which women are supposed to, and now you keep quiet. You go into that corner, you sit quietly, and so again, the responsibility of, okay, here is bad behavior that affects us negatively, but now we have to find the solution to it. Why? Why should it be the women's responsibility again to find a solution that actually is a problem that needs to be solved for, right? And people's behavior does change over time, right? So there can be ways in which you sort of begin the process of behavior change by either, literally just telling people. I mean, recently I took a flight where there were 2 people, which was a very costly solution, but it worked in a way, which was literally 2 people at every security counter. There were 2 people at every security counter telling people not to break the queue and to wait for your tray. Don't take the tray from the previous person. Let the person's baggage go. Then you take your tray, you put your stuff, let it go. Then the next person trades, which should be a matter of habit, but it isn't. So they had literally deputed 2 people per security carousel. Not the most efficient way of solving the problem, but at least it wasn't like, okay, women, if you have a problem, we are just going to put you in that little ghetto over there and then you figure it out. And then if by chance you were a lone woman on the other side, everybody's going to look at you and say either, oh, she's okay with misbehavior, so we can misbehave with her because she's obviously willing to be, misbehaved with. Or say, okay, if you have a problem with this behavior, why did you come here? This place doesn't belong to you. So I think that was my argument that I made in that case. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions, please, everyone come in. We'll have actually, we don't have a lot of time. We can give about 10, 15 minutes. Okay, yeah. Can you please pass on the mic? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, thank you very much, both of you, for giving such an insightful presentation. This is Professor Mishra from Jindal School of Banking and Finance. So I have two questions. The first question is to you both. So you mentioned that from 2017-18, there has been an increase in the female labor participation and the wage. So is it because of the way, yeah, labor force, is it because of the way the innovators have started asking the question, or is it, it could be because from 2017-18, PLFS has started coming where the sampling methodology has also changed? This is my first question. Because CLAMS data, Professor Ashwini showed, and CLAMS, if I'm not wrong, is also coming from PLFS only. So that's, yeah. So is it because of the way the innovators have started, or is it, it could be because of the change in the methodology, the sampling? That is my first. The second is question is to Professor Ashwini, that you mentioned the graph where you showed that the, I think, female labor participation by education, and where you said that it's a U shape. What is your take on the right to education, which came in somewhere close to 2009, which also gives the only basic elementary education? And once the child, any, especially if we talk about the female children who completes the 8th standard, and after that they are like 14 years old, and then they get like all the problems, early childhood, marriage, and taking care of siblings and other such problems. So how is it contributing to this low, like that U shape? It is my two questions.
I'll just add to what he asked. And can we collect actually a few questions? And so I'll just add to what he asked about the enumerator thing. So you said that the fall was because of the training bit, and now, it's kind of they're training them better. Thank you, first of all, for really saying that out loud. We have a small group where we keep asking why is someone not writing about this on Twitter? That is it really because of the way you're conducting interviews? And what I would have thought was that the rise that is being seen now is actually coming because of this whole halabaloo that, okay, we are not having enough women, we're not having enough women. So you really kind of train your enumerators that, listen, go and get that yes from them in some way. And that's why the rise is coming. So I would like to know your thoughts on that. Mopidi, you had a question? There in black.
Am I audible? Okay, firstly, I'd like to thank both the professors for their incredibly insightful lecture. So I wanted to ask a question to Professor Deshpande about her work relating to caste and like affirmative action. I think last year I was lucky enough to attend one of the lectures we had at Jindal, which was you, the Chief Justice of India, and I think Professor Ajanta Subramaniam. And in one of the sections we were discussing, I think, caste-based politics in higher institutions like IIT. And one thing that was discussed in the lecture really stuck with me about like how with a lot of IIT alumni, like association with the institution is like an extension of their like caste-based like identity, and just stigmatization like I just wanted to ask, how do you think we can counter the stigmatization of like caste and gender that exists in these institutions? And just another really short question pertaining to the wonderful article that professor made us read in class was, yeah. No, no, like, so like you spoke about how important it is for us to have this, the institutionalization of like good ethics, but is it maybe a bit of a false dichotomy where it's not institutionalization of ethics versus the pink seats, and rather is there like room for having both of them at the same time simultaneously, or is that something that's not possible in your eyes?
We can ask a question, then we'll take the second round.
Thank you so much. And this is to Professor Deshpande. In your graph that showed, the postgraduate labor force participation high, as well as the literacy rates, do you also see that as educated women being able to work on the backs of domestic workers who are perhaps, not literate? And that's why they are able to go to work, because this is another conversation that they say that, yeah, and has that had any impact on increasing wages for the poorer, or in this case, what you call as illiterate their wages as domestic workers?
Let's have them answer. We'll take the second round. Okay, your follow-up question.
Since it's part of that. Also on this enumerators data, is it matter one, why is it more so for women? That are we saying that, look, the influence is such, the training is such that it affects them asking women more than when it acts, when they ask men? And adding to that, for curiosity, in that experiment that you carried out, did it have a difference between men and women in the responses that you had? Just.
Thank you. Let me take quickly all the enumerated related questions. But before also the sampling. I actually don't think it's the sampling methodology change that's doing it, because between 2017-18 and 22-23, the sampling methodology didn't change, right? And that's where we have been seeing also the increase. So I don't know that it's sampling as such. I think that you may be right, Mrilanidhi, that at first there was this feeling, okay, let's train our enumerators better, okay? But afterwards, there is also probably a bit of a pressure on enumerator. Hey, you haven't caught this women working. I think we actually need a little more analysis of this data with attached to enumerator ID and so on, which should be doable. Then your question about the men versus. So, you know, what happened for us was quite interesting. We saw a slight dip in men's labor force participation when we did this experiment. So just very small, okay? But at least there was a percentage of men who were being ascribed as being the farmers when actually it is their daughters-in-law who were doing the farming, okay? So I think that the enumerator effect in questioning effect doesn't seem to affect men very much because of two reasons. One is men see themselves as workers. Okay. So even if you're a farmer, you see yourself as a worker very aggressively. Okay. So you will respond to it as being saying that, okay, I work. And so do the enumerators see farmers as workers. But for women, there is this both sides have this sort of a tendency to not see themselves as working, and for interviewers to say, okay, yeah, she just takes care of the cows, you know, then cow taking care of, it's not a dairy activity. Okay.
I'll answer the caste question later. Let me answer the pink seats question. So I think that in modes of transport like buses and metros and the Mumbai local, for example, there is a case to be made for pink seats or pink compartments, because these are very large commuter numbers. They're very difficult to regulate. And this sort of institutionalizing quote unquote good behavior, etc., is going to be very, very hard. I mean, it can happen over time, but it's going to be very hard on a daily basis. So these are largely the very crowded, unregulated spaces. So I think it does matter a lot if women get access to a women's compartment in the metro. I've myself used it a lot. I think it makes the journey completely different. And I'd rather have that than having to face the daily, struggles and harassment. But an airplane is a different ride. Airplane, people are not, milling around, etc., etc. You get your seat, you sit there. So all you have to learn is to just put your hand a little bit in and not spread your legs that much. Not such a difficult ask, right? So I think in an airplane setting, I find that this is not necessary. It ghettoizes women further. But in a large commuter setting, which is very crowded, which is unregulated, which is more unruly, yes, I think there is. So I'm not saying a blanket ban to pink seats or anything like that. I think there are contexts where it actually is important and is needed. I don't think we should be careful about not interpreting it as PG women have high labor force participation rates because they employ domestic help. Because I've analyzed the time use survey data. I didn't carry the graph here because I wasn't expecting to show it. If you look at the female to male ratio on time spent on domestic work, it is not the case that for highly educated women, the ratio is lower. If they were outsourcing all that, so yeah, there is a greater outsourcing if you're richer, obviously, many of us do that. But so the ability to outsource is greater if you yourself are richer, but doesn't mean that your time goes down that much. At a national level, and also I've done this at the state level. So I have a graph, and there's a lot of interstate variation. of the female to male time spent. Okay. In terms of wages of domestic workers, I don't know if there's good data because I don't see that category that much in the NSS data, etc. So
Actually, number of households who employ any kind of domestic help is less than 5%. I do want to add one thing though on the care work and the responsibility. One of the things that we have found is that when women are working for and making a monetary income, not just the farm work, okay, actually people start buying a lot of things that they would have otherwise delegated to women. So for example, a movement away from using firewood, okay, towards clean fuel takes place, okay. So actually domestic labor work does go down if women have more income. It still doesn't become equal.
good point. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Sorry, the caste question, can we take that step because it's quite a bit removed from, and you were there at that talk, so there is a context to your question which most people here won't understand. So happy to chat with you on that.
And just because we're ending the pink seat conversation, it'll also help perhaps because for men to know that the remaining 7 coaches are not theirs. It's not a men's coach. Please. So nice. Okay. Okay, we'll take one more round. And there are 2 men. I'll take all the names and then they can ask questions. Shivangi, Sharmin, Ruchira, Samvat. You're too late, Manika. Sorry. And Ashita. Okay.
Hi, if I can just, of course, since we mentioned caste earlier, but just in terms of the female labor force participation rates, is there a breakdown also in terms of caste? So whether if there's a discernible thing in terms of which groups participation is going up and down, or maybe even by region or states like that. So
Let's take all questions. I'm help.
Hi. So one of the questions I had with the graph was the U-shaped curve that you showed, like breaking down with the education and the labor force, like female labor force participation. So I'm new to the field. I'm like a finance researcher. So what is the pattern we see for men? I just wanted to get some context with respect to that because that would help with the interpretation also.
My question follows from the initial question that Mrinalini had asked. The 2 questions: what will bring women to work, and the role of employers' discrimination, because the cost to company will technically go down if they do not employ more women because of the maternity benefits, etc. The way I see it is, and of course, this employer discrimination is more embedded into the westernized understanding of employer-employee relations. If I have to embed the same thing in Indian working, then what I see is that employers would rather want women at, at the glass cliff and have a wage gap. Which is not transparent enough, which reduces the cost to company, which does not increase the cost to company. So is that something that can be thought about? Is that something which is visible or can be worked around? One more thing regarding the enumerators. I was thinking, would it be a good idea to actually have a study around the enumerators? Studying them empirically, that would be, I think, one thing which may reveal brilliant results. So yeah, Manika?
I'll be very brief. Thank you so much, professors, for your time. My name is Samvat. I'm a second-year economics major at the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy. My question was regarding the feedback loop, especially considering that for the movement of women who were previously employed in agrarian-related sectors, for their movement to perhaps sectors like manufacturing or construction that are understood to be more elastic, as you pointed out, a lot of social regulation already exists in the Indian society. What do you perceive as that to be is that a limiting factor? And even if all things considered optimal, if that restriction were to go, does the Indian both construction and manufacturing sector. And like you took the example of both the US and China, both in these cases, manufacturing sectors existed already to as a feeding to intake a lot of the labor that got injected once they left agriculture. Do we have something of that sort in India as well, where all of this migration from agriculture to different sector may take place as well? Thank you so much.
Oh, sorry, last question. Last question. I'll keep it as short as possible. I'll start with a bit of a comment. I have some trouble with social norms as a frame because it lends itself very nicely to measurement. But I wonder, does it separate the social from the economic? There we start asking, economic discrimination. Now, this is hardcore economic discrimination. And social norms, well, this is, something outside of economics, but we can still measure it perhaps as a residual through the Oaxaca. So that's one question I have, and I wonder when we look at social norms in that framework, does that limit our understanding of women's work? Because often it's not just, women are not being confined to unpaid work necessarily as a norm. It could be because of historic reasons. There has been a lot that has written about historic processes that have forced women into work that is later devalorized and therefore unpaid. It might not be a norm per se, and does that limit our understanding?
Thank you. Too many questions. Sorry.
I think clearly it would be great to look at actually what's happening in the field on enumerators. Okay. Let me just quickly respond to you on the social norm thing. Okay. One of the things, let's see, I'm a sociologist by training. Okay. And one of the things that sort of strikes me when economists start talking about social norms, okay, is that basically they are using it as an excuse for they're not able to explain why the employment for women is not expanding in an economy that is ostensibly expanding, right? And so then basically the idea is, oh, well, it's because they must not want to work. Okay. So I think that's where sort of some of the hard reaction that comes into it. I mean, I think there is a whole social context of the work, right? Of what we consider acceptable, what kind of working conditions we want, and so on. Okay. Why is it that we don't see some of the women with middle level of education being employed? Is because some of the work that would be accessible to them might not be considered particularly acceptable. Okay. So I think all of those things matter, but the idea that it's the Indian social norms which are kind of creating this environment in which Indian women are not working, okay, which is essentially an excuse for the fact that your economy is either not growing or not creating enough jobs, okay, is where most of the reaction is coming from.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the thing is, obviously, as you guessed, I'm not a fan of the social norms argument. And it's precisely what she said, which is you can't explain something, so just put it in a norms basket and then you don't have to explain it anymore. Just 1-2 words are enough to explain everything. And so we've discussed that. In terms of the male, somebody asked about, yeah, so the male doesn't show the U shape. So it's flatter, more or less. So the point is that because labor force participation rate is just, even if you're doing 1 hour of work every day, it's not really an employment as, paid 8 hours of work kind of an employment, but you will still be counted in the labor force. So it's related also to the measurement. Let me just quickly. So yeah, your answer to your question is sort of linked to what we said in response to us, which is that, first of all, manufacturing and construction are two different, don't conflate the two. Women do work in construction, not in manufacturing. I mean, not that they don't work, but the ratio in manufacturing has been low and it's remained stagnant. The ratio in construction is the second largest activity in rural India after agriculture for female employment. So the two are not the same. And no country in the world had a ready-made manufacturing sector. It's the process of structural change and structural transformation that creates an industrial sector, a manufacturing sector, then leads to a tertiary sector, etc. These are not ready-made, ready to move in kind of boxes that you leave one box and there's another box just waiting for you and you enter. That's not how historically sectors grow. So India kind of bypassed the manufacturing story a little bit and moved much more rapidly to services. than many of the European countries or even the United States for that matter. So East Asia, China, they have some clues, but we don't have time to talk about any of that. But I don't personally agree that there's something about the Indian psyche where women just can't do this work, whereas women everywhere else can do this work, right? I don't buy that. So yeah, there is a lot of mindset change that needs to be. I mean, why can't women be bus drivers? Why can't they be taxi drivers? Why can't they work at petrol pumps? And gradually you see little bits in some cities, you're trying to see it. So it's not a physical inability to do it, it's just a mindset thing. And your question about employer discrimination, right? So, it's actually, I'm engaged in a very big project on this. It's actually a myth to believe that cost to companies lower if they don't employ women. Because one of the other issues that we didn't talk about in this obsession with labor force participation rates, many things get left out. And one of the things we don't talk about is women at the entry stage, they join a workforce, say in the formal corporate sector. When it comes to having kids, they often drop out, but they want to re-enter. But there's been a gap of 5 to 6 years, and re-entry is a very big issue. They just don't know how to connect and how to get back. And these are women who are willing to work, right? So there are many dimensions to women's work and willingness to work that we didn't touch upon today because we were focusing on labor force participation. If women were not to leave, if they were given maternity leave and they were not to leave, and if they continued as seasoned workers, the cost to company would actually be lower in the medium term. So it's a very myopic view of cost to company. And many employers, by the way, are beginning to see this, that they'd rather retain their workforce that they've trained and give them a year off. Because even with that year off, those workers have learned much more on the job, but retention then becomes an issue. So, yeah.